we especially focus on issues where we need state government to be working together across agencies, but also working with the private sector. So that work is incredibly fun and important, but it really means that I get to spend a lot of time talking to municipalities, to businesses, to other agencies, and obviously the siloed work of any organization is never as productive. So to be able to do that work is really important and exciting. So let me just, there we go. All right. So the issues that my office works on are pretty broad, and I do it with a small but really incredible team. I would say, like many in state government, since March, we have been supporting COVID-19 response and communications. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but I'm happy to try to answer some specific questions. I know, as all businesses have been in absolutely unprecedented territory in the last 9 to 10 months, and it really has been an all hands on deck. How do we support all of the varying issues in state government, in communities, with schools, with making sure our communications are clear? And we certainly have not gotten it perfectly, but we try every day to listen to people and try to get it right. We also manage the Governor's Children's Cabinet, which is a group started by Governor Angus King, and it includes the agencies of Health and Human Services, Education, Department of Labor, Public Safety, and Corrections. And the mission of that group is to really work across state government and in trying to improve the lives of children. And the two goals of the Children's Cabinet are a focus on early childhood education and at-risk youth. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but I'm happy to answer questions. Right now, my office is especially focused on the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee. In May, the governor convened a group of people across varying sectors, but primarily the private sector, to think about both our pandemic response, but how do we build economic recovery as we come out of this obviously incredibly challenging economic situation. So that work has been important and exciting. We've talked about it as a bridge back to the 10-year economic plan that was released by the governor and the Department of Economic and Community Development just last January, or maybe it was December. So obviously the challenges and the importance of focusing on economic recovery, even in the middle of a pandemic, incredibly important and valuable. We also manage the Office of Opioid Response and Recovery. That work is led by Gordon Smith, who some of you probably have heard from and know. And again, an incredibly important issue for the state, an issue that is challenging right now, has really been challenged by this pandemic, but requires a response that includes all parts of state government, lots of work with communities and organizations to make sure we get it right. And the last thing, which I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about today, is the Governor's Climate Council and the Governor's focus on energy. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the work that we're doing. We have a major report due, the 4-year climate action plan, on December 1st. But I want to focus on it partially because I actually think, you know, when people think about climate and climate change, it's sort of a heavy and complicated issue, and it's sort of, you know, what are you going to tell us to do? But I would say that the frame that we're thinking about these issues is really about building our state's economy. There's some incredibly exciting economic opportunity for Maine in climate solutions, so I want to talk in a little bit more detail about that. So I'm just going to go through a bit of a presentation about the governor's details on climate change. I will say, I think I saw Tim Walton out there in the audience, but this, as you can see, is an offshore wind turbine. One of the largest industries we're seeing growing rapidly in Europe, a renewable energy source powered by wind. Maine has some of the best ocean wind in the country. So the governor has worked closely with groups like Chimbro and the University of Maine, and we are really hoping to pioneer the first floating offshore wind turbine in the United States. And again, this is sort of the beginning of how we tackle climate change and build economic opportunity. So the governor, since her inauguration more than 2 years ago, has focused on issues of the environment and the economy. Obviously, Maine is a beautiful state. It's important to our livelihoods and businesses. The reason people come here and visit is because of our natural beauty, and I think most Mainers across the political spectrum believe that preservation of our environment is important. So the governor has focused on how the environment and clean energy can fuel our economy, and there's a couple of significant actions she's taken in the last 2 years. Probably the most significant was a new state renewable portfolio standard law requiring 80% of the state's electricity energy come from renewable power by 2030. We have already seen with a procurement just in the past month, just an incredible growth in solar projects, some larger wind projects, as well as hydro and biomass. Again, there's a lot of projects in the queue creating hundreds of jobs and clean energy for Maine. And the good news is it's coming at an incredibly affordable price. I think the average price for the energy that was just procured by the state PUC was 3.5 cents. So competitive, clean energy that creates Maine jobs, really a win-win. She's also passed a law to implement 100,000 new heat pumps in Maine. I think probably most people at this point are familiar with heat pumps, but an electric heat source. We have seen just an explosion of growth in new installers who are on track to install more than 15,000 heat pumps even in this pandemic year of 2020. The governor, you will hear a little bit more about electric vehicles, but we've been using money from the VW emissions cheating settlements to help install new charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, to help support public transportation and rebates. The governor also, as I talked about, has been focused on allowing wind energy to move forward, offshore wind, and a number of things to be proactive on issues of climate and energy. So I talked a little bit about these. I would say that for businesses, we have, the governor has really worked to focus and supercharge the solar industry. We are seeing just an incredible growth on people's homes and small business projects, and obviously large grid scale projects. I won't go into all the boring details of the different programs, but again, in the Augusta area, I'm sure people have driven by it. There are several large solar projects being built right now that will generate lower cost power for the state, for private businesses, as well as the grid. So one of the sort of the overarching challenges is how does Maine tackle climate change in a more broad-based way? In 2019, the governor passed legislation to create the Maine Climate Council. The Maine Climate Council has our big report, our 4-year action plan due this coming December 1st, and there are several parts of that plan that the state is required to meet. Probably most importantly is to reduce the state's emissions by 45% by 2030 and at least 80% by 2050. The other parts of the plan are ensuring that Maine people, industries, and communities are resilient to the impacts of climate. I think this is especially important, as I'll talk a little bit more about, for our economy. And the other thing the governor has signed on to is a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2045, which really just means Maine has vast forest resources that sequester carbon dioxide, so that there's a balance between reducing our emissions and the sequestration, so that by 2045, those two things are neutral. So the Climate Council has 4 goals, and I really, I think the fact that the first one is to create jobs and economic opportunity through climate transitions is really a testament to both the governor's commitment and to the opportunities we see for Maine. The other goal is, again, as I mentioned, to reduce Maine's emissions and then prepare Maine residents, businesses, and communities for climate impacts. And then to ensure that this work and these strategies are equitable, that we are making sure that low-income and rural Mainers have the same opportunities and access to the kinds of technology we're seeing evolving rapidly in other parts of the country. So our process on the Climate Council, we started last June of 2019, which at this point feels like about 15 years ago, and I'm sure you can all sympathize with what this last year has been like. We launched working groups in September to start focusing on the issues of climate, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. We have deliberated on the plan, which has just been approved in draft form, and we will release it on December 1st. So the Climate Council is a group of 39 people. It includes scientists, legislators, industry leaders, local officials, as well as a number of representatives from business. The head of the Maine Lobstermen's Association, the head of the Maine Forest Products Council, head of a chamber from Bethel, some small business people, and we've all been tasked with creating this climate action plan. The plan also, we also had 6 working groups with hundreds of Maine people who worked on all of the strategies that were then brought to the Maine Climate Council. Those groups focused on transportation, energy, buildings, housing and infrastructure, community resilience, and coastal and marine issues. And then at the center of all of our work was a science and technical committee that really made sure that the work we were doing was grounded in science and data and facts. So just to give you a quick overview of what this means, when we talk about reducing our emissions, where is Maine now? So the baseline for Maine's emissions reductions is 1990. So you can see on the 2030 and 2050 goals, the yellow line is where we need to be. At this point, Maine has already reduced our emissions about 17.5%, and this has really come through innovation and technology. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative has already led to more renewables, reducing the emissions in our electricity sector. Transitions to natural gas have helped, and other transitions in our economy. So where do our emissions come from? You can see here that the vast majority of the state's emissions come from first transportation, 54%. We are a rural state. People drive a lot. Even in the southern part of our state, people drive more than they do in many other states. So transportation, especially all of our commuting, is really the primary source of Maine's emissions. Next is our residential and commercial buildings and the electricity we use in those buildings, which is about 30%, then industrial, and then electric power. So lots of different analysis has gone into the Maine Climate Council. I won't go through all the details, but we've done a lot of analysis and data crunching, trying to understand the strategies that will work, the impact of those strategies, both from a modeling perspective, but also an economic perspective. We've thought about the equity issues. And again, I think most exciting and maybe interesting to this group, we've really thought about how this transition could strengthen Maine's economy. We just came out with a report last week called Strengthening Maine's Clean Energy Economy. And it's really a roadmap for growth with a focus on the kind of innovation investments, workforce opportunities Maine could see with this climate transition. Again, we've really relied on scientists. Maine has an incredible wealth of scientists. The University of Maine, the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, Jackson Lab, and other places. And I think we are lucky to have them, and the science that they have put forward really will help drive our plan. I would say the numbers here are sort of part of our challenge when it comes to how do we prepare Maine for climate, for both our coastal and also our flood-prone communities. The Science and Technical Subcommittee was required to put out projections of what sea level rise will mean for Maine. And we are anticipating at least a 1.5 foot relative sea level rise by 2050 and nearly 4 feet by 2100. And then with additional storm surge and other risks, potentially 3 feet by 2050 and almost 9 feet by 2100. So again, obviously significant infrastructure risk, risk to communities, to tourism, to transportation infrastructure, if we don't plan now for what this could mean. So I'm not going to go through all the details of the report and the plan that's coming out, but I will just kind of highlight a couple of the major strategies. Obviously, a transition in our transportation infrastructure that is driven by increased electric vehicle use, reducing emissions from our current vehicles with more fuel-efficient vehicles, and then supporting a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. We have seen already in this pandemic, that people are driving less. So obviously there are a number of different strategies to help continue that along. Modernizing Maine's buildings through weatherization, efficiency, building codes, a transition to heating systems, again, like heat pumps. Those are some of the primary examples of how we move Maine's building sector along. And I will say again, the electricity sector is already leading the way. And again, the transition to clean energy will really make a transformational difference in both our economy and this sector. We have a lot of focus on how do we support the industrial sector in Maine. I would say many of Maine's large paper mills and other sectors are already national leaders with combined heat and power, with innovative processes, and again, how we highlight them and continue to support that work will make a big difference. So this is, again, just sort of, this is actually a map of New England, and you can see the red areas are where the majority of emissions are coming from. The green areas are the areas that are heavily forested and certainly not producing as much emissions. Maine's emissions compared to the rest of New England are still quite small, but with our incredibly large tourism population every summer, certainly the 95 corridor is where a lot of the driving happens. So one of the other goals of that I talked about, how do we grow Maine's economy with this climate transition? So we are seeing nationally that the clean energy employment sector is far outpacing the growth of nationwide employment. So a 10.5% growth in the last 5 years in the clean energy sector, with just a 6% growth in nationwide employment. We've seen some of this growth in Maine, but I would say we are the slowest state in New England in terms of clean energy growth. And again, the report that we just put out was about the opportunity for Maine in terms of both clean energy, energy efficiency, and other innovation that will just allow, I think we see this as one of the top areas of growth opportunity for the state's economy. The other thing is just preparing Maine for climate change impacts. I think this roadside is somewhere in central Maine. We're seeing increasing storm events, which are anticipated to increase with climate change. So how do we prepare our infrastructure in our communities for this kind of change? A lot of it is just planning, support for infrastructure, support for municipal government that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And this kind of work is going to be long and slow and steady, but also presents opportunity in a period like today to put people back to work, to rebuild infrastructure. So I won't talk much more about the Maine Climate Council, but I'm happy to answer questions. I will say our website, climatecouncil.maine.gov, has more reports than you'll ever want to read, but we would love to hear your input. We've gotten comments from thousands of Maine people as we put this plan together, and are always looking to hear from folks across the state as we chart the course to what's next. I just want to finish by talking a little bit about the Economic Recovery Committee. The Economic Recovery Committee also has a report due by December 1. The committee has really, I would say, slogged away. You know, when the committee was first formed in May, they were looking at sort of pandemic response. How do we spend money coming from the federal government to immediately help the variety of Maine people and sectors who are most impacted? There was a hope in May that we would be charting a course towards economic recovery, and that has remained the area of focus for the Economic Recovery Committee. But obviously there's still a recognition that we are certainly not out of the woods in terms of this pandemic and this incredibly challenging economic period, but that it's important while the state is focusing on the immediate response, that a group of business leaders and other nonprofit and other leaders really think about how does Maine stay focused on long-term economic growth, because the need to think about recovery from this economic period is going to be incredibly important. So just a quick preview of a report, which I actually think is likely to be coming out next Tuesday or Wednesday. The committee has focused on a number of sort of headliner strategies, and they are probably very familiar to everyone on this Zoom call, that these are the areas that Maine businesses have long said are important, where the state needs to focus. So obviously, I would say innovation is one of their top areas of focus. How do we increase the number of jobs and sort of the good paying jobs that drive our economic recovery? Requires investment in innovation, investment that adds value to our natural resources, as well as the next generation technology that will grow good jobs in our state. Entrepreneurship, how do we really support what has always been the backbone of Maine's economy, our small businesses? How do we support the spirit of entrepreneurship, as well as the investments needed to help medium and small businesses really grow? So that was a major area of focus. There are both investment strategies, financing strategies, as well as how do we create communities that believe and support entrepreneurship across the state. Talent development, more boringly termed workforce, I think is probably Maine's most significant challenge. We are seeing sectors, even in this economic period, that cannot find a skilled workforce. Obviously, this is both crucial and problematic in the healthcare industry, which is probably among the most challenged to find a skilled workforce. But we're seeing it, Abbott Labs, the folks who are producing some of the solutions to this pandemic are hiring hundreds of Maine people and challenged to find a skilled workforce. So how does Maine both train the people we have, retrain workers to go into these new industries, and then how do we attract workers to Maine? Maine's aging workforce will continue to create a gap in terms of the number of people the state has who are able to be in the workforce. And as that gap grows over the next 10 to 15 years, we know we need to attract new people to Maine and make sure that every worker who is eligible to work is trained and placed in sort of at their highest capacity. So the talent development of Maine's people and the people who we need to attract to Maine really needs to be among the most significant areas of focus for the state. I would say there's a number of other kind of infrastructure bedrock issues that have been primary to the Economic Recovery Committee. Connectivity and internet access, I think, has been especially exposed by this pandemic, as people need to work from home, their kids need to learn from home, they need to run their businesses from home, seniors need to access telehealth from home, and the lack of internet connectivity to certain parts of our state, the speeds of that connectivity is absolutely crucial. I mean, it's crucial for even our climate, it's crucial for our economy, it's crucial for sort of the basic tasks of daily living in a pandemic. So internet access is among the probably the most significant ongoing recommendations of every economic group that gets together and meets. How we support early care and education, for both the reasons of our kids in the first 5 years of their life make a big difference to their ability to succeed later in life. But also, I would say, as this pandemic has shown, the ability of working parents to have access to high quality early care and education has been crucial, and where it has not been available or it has been slowed by this pandemic, it has really impacted parents' ability to work. think housing is an issue that is always simmering, but has become kind of a crisis level for low-income families who've been challenged by this pandemic. But housing is an issue where we see growing workforce challenges in a variety of areas of Maine. And I'm sure even in the Augusta area, I know everyone has stories of houses that have sold in less than 2 hours. We're seeing significant interest from out of state in Maine real estate. And I think as that trend is likely to continue, the needs for more access, more supply of workforce and affordable housing in Maine, as well as housing at all price levels, is going to be critical to Maine's ability to grow and prosper economically. Last, I would say there's been a lot of focus during this pandemic. The early numbers about the impact of COVID on people of different races has been fairly significant and disturbing. The impacts for low income and rural people in Maine have just shown that Maine has a long ways to go in terms of inequity and equality. So the issues have been brought up by a very bipartisan group of the Economic Recovery Committee, who both sees a need to address those issues, but also sees real economic opportunity to grow our state and workforce with a more supportive attitude towards new people and new businesses. So with that, I will stop talking, but I really appreciate your invitation. I'm really happy to answer questions, again, on almost any issue. Again, I'm not an expert on all things state government, but have gotten to work on some exciting issues over the last 2 years. Again, I know that this is a challenging period, but we also see some incredible opportunities for Maine. So happy to talk more specifically about any of those.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. We do have a couple questions from Walton, so I'm going to allow him to talk. And see. Tim, are you there?
I am. I just unmuted myself. So Hannah, I'm inclined to always address you as Madam Speaker. So, but today, Commissioner Pingree, just a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for doing this. This is great, very informative. On the Climate Council, I just have a comment, really. I work closely with Matt Marks, as you know, and over at AGC, and he's been filling us in on everything you and your team have been doing, and really not just listening, but really listening to our industry's concerns. And I think a lot of that reflected in the report. So thank you for that. I know it's an ongoing process, and we're in for the long haul. So.
Tim, we lost you. You out there? Oh, you look muted now, Tim. Nope, you're muted again.
Mute.
There you go.
There we go. All right. The other thing, with regards to, this may not be your area, Hannah, but if you have any insight, that'd be great. The economic grants that people applied for and were notified they were recipients of or going to be, when is that money slated to be released? Do you know? Because the reason I ask, let me just premise it. I've got a friend who his business got one. It was awarded one, but they just haven't seen it. He called me last night, so I figured I'd ask what's on the line.
No, it's a good. I can't tell you every detail, but I have worked with Heather Johnson a little bit on that program. I would say so. We have had 2 different rounds, and my understanding was that round 1 was going out or has gone out. So if
Okay.
Your friend was awarded a grant in round 1, it should be received any day now, if it hasn't already. I know the second round of notifications is going out soon. And there's also some opportunity. I know there's a consideration of a lightning round for a specific kind of sector of businesses who've been most impacted in the service industry, and you're likely to hear more about that in the next couple of days. So again, the almost $200 million was put on the table. A lot of that has been awarded or is about to be awarded, and I think it's certainly not enough. for any business and all the challenges they face, especially in the service industry. But I think hopefully it will help.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Tim, I will just say, Matt Marks and the Associated General Contractors, I mean, he's been a super helpful participant in our climate work and even our economic recovery work. And I would just say, we all see, we've been hearing about federal support for shovel-ready projects, and we see a lot of potential opportunity in the next year to put people back to work, to really fix all the roads and invest in some of this new technology. And so I think we're all really hoping that will happen. I'd also say Matt's kind of interest in really digging in and being a part of solutions. Improving building codes is going to be complicated. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it will take real partnership with industry to make sure that we get it right.
Yeah, he's really a great treasure for us. So appreciate that. I'll pass that on to him.
Great.
Thank you, Tim. Another question, Hannah, that just came in is, I know of the Live Work in Maine, but what other specific efforts exist or are proposed to attract talent to Maine from away?
That's a great question. I would say that the Live Work in Maine is something the state has supported, and they've done a great job of sort of highlighting and connecting people to resources. Right before the pandemic hit, the governor was sort of in progress with a Welcome Home program, which was sort of a variety of policies and initiatives to improve the Opportunity Maine tax credit, to consider specific advertising campaigns to attract people to Maine to take jobs in industries that we knew we needed more workers. So that effort is likely to be jump-started at the end of the Economic Recovery Committee process. I would say everyone's been distracted. I would say naturally we have seen, and I'm sure everyone's seen this all across the state, people have moved to Maine permanently or temporarily. It's still kind of too soon to know, but this pandemic period has kind of been a natural advertisement for Maine as people have looked for areas with more outdoor opportunity, with sort of, where they felt more comfortable sending their kids to school with affordable real estate. So there's been a lot of discussion about how do we capitalize on that? How do we use some of our attraction dollars to make sure we're advertising to people who might consider moving to Maine? But obviously there's still a balance of we don't want to be selling a lot of properties across the state to seasonal homeowners, making it out of reach for Maine people. So there's sort of a balance. There are a couple of specific efforts in certain industry sectors. There is a new proposed energy workforce portal that will specifically seek to connect Mainers with training opportunities and job opportunities in the energy sector, but will also reach out to New England to sort of better advertise the good paying jobs we have available here in Maine. Again, there's rural Maine wind projects that offer great, good paying jobs, solar installers. We have a huge need for more electricians in Maine. And so by advertising those jobs and bringing families to Maine and bringing them to areas where the schools need kids and the communities need population, it's potentially a real win-win. So we're kind of looking at different industry sectors, whether it's energy, aquaculture, the natural resource industries in different parts of our state, all that have workforce needs, and those same communities are looking for population. So there's both kind of a piecemeal, but also a big picture approach. We're always open to ideas. So if anybody has a suggestion, please send it along.
Perfect, thank you. I'll open it back up. Anybody has any questions for Hannah, please submit them. One just came in. I know we have scheduled you to meet with us before COVID hit the fan this year. How have your perspective and expectations been changed by the pandemic, especially given the massive losses in state revenue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent question. I think we all were operating in a different mindset. I mean, from the state's 10-year economic plan to thinking about climate and energy to all the other issues. I think we had a hopeful vision of what was possible. I would say we're kind of entering a more difficult period for Maine people. Winter the holiday season can be great. Winter is rough for people, and this pandemic is creating economic challenges for family, challenges for state workers in the budget. People are feeling burnt out, and so I'm not going to lie and say it is a challenging time. The fact that Washington, D.C. is sort of unable to get along and agree on just even basic things like, a re-extension of the PPP program, which is desperately needed right now, is I think frustrating and disappointing. I think we're hopeful that at some point Congress in DC will get its act together. That will obviously be a huge help to Maine, because I think Maine is kind of at the end of its road in terms of we've spent most of the money that's come from the federal government. Our state revenues are down. There's a difficult budget coming in terms of, how do we even pay for the healthcare and education needs of the people of Maine and do everything else at a time when there's going to be less money. So all of our expectations are tempered, but at the same time, I think the needs to plan ahead are still there. I mean, while you're in a challenging economic period, you've got to stay focused on how do you grow the economy. You got to stay focused on, businesses are still telling us they can't find qualified employees for growing industries. So, while we're all mired in some of the day-to-day of managing, budgets and, a very challenging health situation, we still need to stay focused on economic growth and the pieces of that economic growth. Again, whether it's internet access, whether it's attracting workforce, whether it's job training and education for our kids. If we give up on those things, we're sort of, we are sacrificing the long term. And I will say, I feel very positive about the opportunities Maine has. I mean, I talked a lot about climate and energy, but I think it's just one area where there is a world where forest products are going to become more valuable than they've ever been. There's a lot of opportunity in the forest product sector. There's opportunity in energy. There's an opportunity for remote work that we've never seen before. And I think that those things will all be good for Maine, because we live in a beautiful state. I think we all feel lucky to live here. We certainly don't want everybody to move to Maine, but I think as other people figure that out and bring both remote work and an ability to work at the great companies we have in Maine, that will be positive for our long-term growth. So yeah, we're all feeling a little more burnt out and depressed, but I think, some of this vaccine stuff gives us a little light at the end of the tunnel. And again, we've just got to stay focused on the opportunities Maine has and sort of what makes Maine great, could make Maine even better. So I try to take a positive approach, at least for today.
Perfect. Any other questions or any final remarks, Hannah, from you before we finish up? Oh, another question just came in. How do our Canadian neighbors to the north figure in our future positioning?
That's a great question. I would say that we've already had some, first of all, none of us have been able to go to Canada in quite some time. My kids, we had a whole trip planned to the Maritimes that's not going to happen until we open the border again. And I would say the closed border has been really challenging for certain parts of our state where people are more used to going back and forth. I would say we've had some specific outreach from a number of the provinces around Maine. We see like very accelerated activity, especially in Quebec, around climate and energy issues, in New Brunswick. And those premiers have worked closely with the governor and really interested in future economic opportunity between the two areas. I think a lot of Mainers don't spend that much time in Canada, but we have a lot in common. And I think there's a lot of increased economic opportunity that could happen with better relationships. So, just in the area of energy, obviously we have a major transmission line being proposed to be built across Maine, highly controversial, but also bringing jobs and economic benefit. Hydro-Quebec specifically is making investments in Maine that will help weatherize more homes, help us make some of this transition to heat pumps and electric vehicles. So I see that as a positive. But again, great question, probably a question we should spend a little more time thinking about, because as close as they are, I think we're much more focused on southern New England and trade in that direction. And while there's probably a lot more opportunity working with our Canadian neighbors.
Yeah, and I would say with the border closed, you know, the tourism dollars and all of that we're not getting this season, definitely hurting us.
Yeah. I think we saw that a number of 15 to 17% of tourists come from Canada. So that's a big hit, and obviously it's an especially big hit in certain regions of our state, Washington County, Aroostook County, areas where they see a lot more of those visits.
Well, perfect. Any other closing remarks from you, Hannah?
Do you want me to answer this last question? Technical colleges?
Yep. Are the technical colleges able to provide programs that will help the new jobs and the new technologies being developed?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a great question. I feel like I didn't ask you to ask that question. So we already see, especially at the community college level, but also our CTEs at the high school level, really focused on this new technology, trying to get kids and workers and retrain workers in these jobs that we now have available. I think Kennebec County Community College has a program in heat pump installations. Northern Maine Community College has a wind program. I think we're seeing a significant uptick in the need for construction trades, whether it's HVAC, electricians, skilled contractors. So we are actually, it's funny, we're meeting with the community colleges this afternoon on this very subject, because I think there is, we're already hearing efficiency contractors, solar installers saying we need more trained workers. We know people in Maine are out of work, so how do we make those connections? The community colleges, some adult education programs are really the key. So we're very focused on that, and really, especially the community colleges have been very flexible about, you know, how do we do it? How do we fit into people's lives who are busy working right now? How do we have night programs? How do we do short-term programs? So I'm excited, and I think a lot more of this activity will need to happen. I think folks have probably been following the Rue Institute in Portland. They have put out millions of dollars in potential scholarships to Maine people for graduate training in sort of highly skilled trades, whether it's AI technology, biotech, there's engineering stuff on the horizon. So all of that is sort of another way to retrain and sort of help Maine workers get access to higher paying jobs and careers. So I think it's all important. And obviously, if we don't do that work, these jobs, we can't fill the jobs won't stay in Maine. So it's essential we find ways to train people.
With that as well, instead of just with the community colleges, are you working more with the high schools and the tech schools to really start that process of the future, 4 or 5 years out? What work are you guys doing with the tech schools?
Well, the CTEs they all seem to have a slightly different approach. We're trying to figure out how to better coordinate them. I mean, there are certain schools that, the Bangor CTE program has been especially advanced at really helping kids see the opportunities on the horizon and get them into pathways that really lead to good paying jobs. We're working with the Department of Education, and this was part of the state economic plan of how do you help kids as young as kindergarten to sort of see job opportunities that might be available to them in different career paths. I mean, obviously a kindergartner, I have a second grade son who wants to be, he has a lot of plans. He has mostly space plans, so I don't want to dissuade him right now, but I think there are the pathways for kids K to 12 as well as after that are essential. I would say we need a lot more work. Schools are mostly locally controlled, so I think for every school board member out there, I think this is a great question for you as well, of how do we really get kids into pathways that will help them have good paying careers help make these issues exciting for them. I mean, I would say we've seen a lot of interest among high school students in climate and energy issues. You know, they don't want to be electricians or HVAC technicians, but they're interested in climate change. So, okay, well, this is how you do it. So I think we need to help make those connections, and that work is happening, but I would say we've been slightly distracted by the pandemic, so need to get it back on course.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Hannah, for taking the time today and sharing all this great information and taking the time to answer some questions. If anybody else has other questions after this or would like to reach out to you, what's the best way to get in contact?
Our website, maine.gov/future you can find my email. It's probably the best way to find me. We'd love to hear from you, ideas, suggestions. I'd say all of our work requires stakeholders, businesses, communities to be involved. So happy to hear from anybody. And again, really appreciate you having me here today.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our sponsor again, Kennebec Savings Bank. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day and happy Thanksgiving to you all next week as well. See you later.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.